I wanted to share something new that I did. We've been having these greatest conversations on this podcast called Science Counterpunch, where we invited, scientists under threat, science communicators, science activists to kind of explain a little bit what's the current situation in the US and in the wider world about, anti-science, what obstacles people face, and also kind of what lessons scientists should take in this new information environment, how to be more resilient, how to fight back against, anti-science, against insanity, against fascistic politics that try to subvert or destroy science and scientific institutions. And so we had a bunch of these conversations. You can check them here. But what I really wanted to show you today is this one. So here, as part of, an ongoing project to make the content that we produce a bit more accessible in a way that's more participatory, in a way that's maybe a bit more structured, I've been working with AI tools and coding tools to create something that's a bit more interactive. And I just wanted to walk you through a little bit, what's this new Counterpunch Insights library? What is this? What can it do for you? And how does it look like? So first, we have a very basic kind of overview of all the cards. There's a search box. We have a classification where you see that, we can either take all the episodes or we take specific episodes. But if you do all the episodes and you're just focused on what are the tactics, then you can see that, from all the tactics that our guests encountered, you see a bit of an overview. For example, weaponizing freedom language is one of those cards, right? Or demanding debates to manufacture this legitimacy. And you just scroll down and you see fake civility, gish galloping, grifter incentives. You see a lot of these tactics. Sometimes, there's a tactic and the consequence. For example, when you have this, the Trump administration started banning words. So when your grant contained a word like black or woman or vulnerable, your grant might be cancelled just, using an automated system, although you might have very legitimate reasons to have this included, for example, for describing demographics when you're studying, for example, drug addiction or whatever it might be. So, this gives a bit of an overview of, what tactics are out there, and, how when you're a science communicator or when you're in the public space, or even if you're just a scientist trying to keep your head down and doing your work, what can you face? We also have something that I call systemic. So this is kind of a systemic problem. This could be, something like funding for pandemic prevention is being down. Regulators at the ACID in the US, the vaccine regulators have been replaced by political stooges that kind of kill vaccine requirements. USDA has been dismantled. So these are really like systematic issues. Or also something like, graduate training doesn't equip scientists to be communicators. You see that, different people have different opinions. What are systemic problems? The next thing is consequence, which is a bit less interesting, I think. This is really more like anecdotes of what happened to scientists. Diagnostic might be a bit more interesting. So this is really about, what are the larger patterns behind some of this? For example, money, dark money being there, science being important for democracy. And so if democracy goes down, if the fascists keep attacking democracy, they also keep attacking science, because science is very important for democracy, for the decision making in democracies, for understanding what's happening to society. So these are also quite interesting to look at. And then the most important part here is what I call the solution part. And here we see like, it's almost 100 cards, because the point of Science Counterpunch is also we prompted all our experts to kind of put down what do you think could be a solution, right, for some of these problems that you encounter. And you see we have a lot of ideas. Not all of them are, super specific. Some of them are against systemic problems. Some of them are against more practical problems. And in order to have a really good overview on how to tackle this, we can click to the next one here, which is kind of the problem solution map. And here you see this is kind of the problems, and this is what are the solutions to it. So one of the problem here, when you see follow the money, you see the cards that are, the financial incentives, the grifters, the Koch-funded, networks. You see that this is kind of, if you don't follow the money, you see a little bit of the description here that says, grift is often more profitable long before it's ideological. And you see that this is a big problem. So money kind of distorts public perception of science for this vested interest. And what can be done there? There's like from the solution bucket, we see like, institutional and policy safeguards, or also you would see like public transparency and documentation. So of course, follow the money requires some transparency, but it also requires, for example, some policy safeguards. So you need some political and institutional guardrails against this. Another issue you could look like it's like broken media and platform incentives. So what does this describe? Here, this is kind of all the issues like, Musk taking over X, public understanding of science, information overabundance, media ownership, echo chambers. So, you find all the hits there. And this is because our information ecosystem is at the moment structurally broken. It's been captured by, unaccountable Silicon Valley billionaires and also, politicians and power brokers. And it's not really reflective of, the public opinion and the public good. And what can we do here? And then you see there's a couple of solutions here. First is like, building a science communicator ecosystem, learning how to better debunk, how to better persuade people with scientific information, and also some institutional policy safeguards. So if you click in here, you will also find, what you can do. You start debunking, you meet the audiences where they are. You could use, more direct content. You can also, offer a more empathetic content. So, whatever resonates with audience, you have to keep working on these. So this is kind of the problem solution space outlined here. And then it's a bit more nerdy. When you're like into the nerd stuff, you can see that, we have some episodes outlined, and then you see, for example, historical parallel, if the guests mention something. Here, for example, Michael Mann mentioned the Einstein's 1933 letters, and that, where Einstein refused to accept that scientists should stay out of politics, especially on matters per science. And this is something we see just, in a recent Nature op-ed. We just saw again that people try to blame scientists for getting political or partisan when they didn't bring politics. It's the political self-sorting that made, the Republican Party at the moment very anti-science. This has nothing to do with scientists moving. It has to do with scientists speaking up for truth. Some others, the Anschluss from Austria, Lysenkoism is also one of these. I think that comes obeying in advance. So you see, there's a bit more of the nerdy stuff, and also, which solution come from which people for what problems. You can just different way to parse the data. And the last thing here is also, some of our guests, sometimes we share anecdotes, right? For example, this public shaming is something that, many people agree that, this could be an option. Or other guests said, came back to RFK Jr. because he is such a terrible case study of, an partisan hack being in a powerful office, destroying a lot of science and scientific endeavors and attacking scientists. So RFK Jr., is raised often. Then the institutions, they kind of, they punish scientists more for speaking out than they do for grifters, for, lying. The same here, that, at the moment, too many academics are too timid. They think that, a white paper or a press release has any chance of succeeding in what has been a full information war. It's just, a different way to explore some of these things. But yeah, have a look down here. You can also, do per episode and see, what's the input from different people per episode. It's just a different way to kind of understand the content that we do, maybe in a bit of a shorter format. maybe a bit more specialized. And if you're like, or even if you're interested in something like, Musk, what's going on, when did you talk about Musk, in what context? You see that Musk is being part of this, platform owners or Twitter, or, this whole censorship story. You see some of this, or the Royal Society failing to kick Musk out despite him being in breach of their policies, as an example of a systemic problem with the institutions and scientific societies. So you can just, play around a little bit and find things that might be interesting and explore specifically the solution space. Because if you see it now here with all these different cards and just, browse through it, you also, it's a bit of a pick and choose. You see, oh, wow, these are kind of, really interesting insights from some of them. And what I should mention is that, there's also, a direct link for many of these direct quotes. And then you click on it, and then it brings you directly to the podcast and when it was said and what was the context.
Routine, right? Like, what did you spend your 5 minutes doing today to help us save science and democracy?
So you guys out there who are listening.
So yeah, you see that there's also a good way to find some of these quotes, and there, that's Flint probably. If you click on this, right?
Is the coward.
So you're holding them to their own standards.
Yeah.
Like, come on.
And so, like, fuck off. You're going to call us a coward. Let's do this. And so my only requirement was to go first. And I've written about this in a lot of different places, about forming a truth sandwich and pre-bunking the argument.
Yeah.
And, how we need to do research into their things. And so I deployed that stuff fairly effectively, as you said.
So yeah, that's the library. I will put the link in the description of this video later. And yeah, play around with it. This is a different way to consume this content. If you're not willing to listen to, I don't know, it's a lot of hours of podcast. I think each episode is like an hour, and we have 10 episodes. That's over 10 hours of content. If you're not willing to listen to it, if you're not caring about, the write-up for it, this is a different way of access this content and the insights of these experts, specifically in the solution-oriented space, the need for scientists to work together, to also organize. You see always the high-level summary, what's going on here, like movement building, a protest. And there's multiple guests that touch on this. I mean, Colette de la Valle from Center for Science, of course, Greg Gonsalves, a lifelong HIV activist. So it's very interesting to really see, what can be done, because, each of this has a lot. He has 14 cards, right? There's like 14 insights, 14 ideas. Some of them are maybe a little bit overlapping, but some of them are really interesting ideas that you might never have thought about. And this is an easy way to access it, just by looking at what are the larger solution space. If you want to start debunking, what are good tips for debunking? What should I take care of when it's about debunking? What do I want to do when it comes to debunking? So play around with it. It's really something that I feel like can be very useful. If you're more of an auditory guy, of course, we have the Spotify link here, like I outlined here. We have everything on the Science Counterpunch. You can watch the episode. You can watch it on YouTube as well. Yeah. And there's another thing I wanted to highlight, which is this blog here. So this is also a bit of the larger lessons. So this is another blog that I wrote some time back that was also very popular. And there you see a little bit, why do we need to talk about anti-science? What are the big issues here? This is also based on this conversation that anti-science, we have to understand this is structurally, this is not driven by people just being confused, but this is really driven by vested interests, by politics, by actors and manipulators that want to destroy science for power, basically. Then harassment is not something that scientists speak out and they make a mistake and that's why I get harassment. No, that's not what happens. Harassment is basically, the more effective you are, the more harassment you get, because people want to destroy your influence. They want to destroy your voice. They want to destroy your public power, and this is why you get attacked. And so we have to understand that scientists that are portrayed as being controversial in the media often might not be. They might just be villainized by a media machine, especially a right-wing media machine. Another thing for science communicators is that narrative is much more important than evidence. If you just present cold, dry facts, that will not fly. You have to embed it into stories, into anecdotes, into something that people can connect to. Scientific norms in general fail in this asymmetric information environments that we live in. So that means that, posts go viral. There's no politeness norms. Everything gets decontextualized. So the idea that you can just, have a polite scientific debate with some of these bad actors is just completely outdated. This is not how it works at all. So you have to understand the environment. Then disinformation itself is very emotional. So you have to understand that there's a cognitive aspect to it, that, you cannot fact check yourself out of reasoning that people don't reason themselves into, but they get manipulated emotionally into. So what usually would have to provide is an emotional way out of the disinformation, much more than a factual way out of the disinformation. And lastly, it's an institutional perspective, which is like the scientific institution, but also other institutions. They are not yet there to protect scientists. Many of them kind of leave their scientists out there dry. If public backlash is used, if there's lawfare against scientists, many scientists and academics lost their jobs when the pushback got too much and the institution wasn't behind them. So this is something also the institutions have to work towards, and the scientific societies and so forth. So this is kind of what's the environment, and then, also a little bit how it works with the crowdsourced influence campaigns against scientists, which is not really crowdsourced, but billionaire sponsored and, amplified and so forth. And then what's maybe the most important part, not this one, is this idea here. How can we now fight back against anti-science, right? If you're part of the scientific community, you have to start building collective power, because these efforts try to take away your voice, they try to take away your influence, they try to take away the access to the public. So they want to isolate scientists in order to eliminate them and their influence that, the authority of science and the scientific consensus brings. So in order to counteract that, you have to think about building organizations that, make sure your influence is not easily, subdued or subverted. You have to build also solidarity networks, legal defense funds. This is, when individual scientists get targeted. Michael Mann calls it the Serengeti strategy, that they try to pick individual scientists and make an example out of them with harassment, with death threats, with legal intimidation, in order for keeping all the other scientists from speaking out in the first place. So that's a repression tactic. And so in order to protect individual scientists, you just need some kind of collective, defense funds, so that, whenever the pressure campaigns against individuals reaches somebody, there's a way they can be defended and they are not left to their own devices and their own advice. And then, of course, the last thing that, don't just think it has to be a coalition among, scientists or academies. This is really a cross-functional thing. So the allies are pro-democratic forces, labor movements, you name it. They are all allies to this collective power against right-wing fascism, against techno-billionaires and techno-feudalist billionaires. So these are your allies. This is the part you have to build. The second one, and this is the thing, don't fall silent. Don't kind of try to portray science as being apolitical, or keeping out of politics to avoid the perception of looking partisan. This world doesn't exist anymore, especially in the US. Bipartisanship does not exist. What's more important for your integrity and your trust is that you spotlight with moral clarity, things that are wrong, that you use science and the truth that science brings to speak truth to power. Being a coward, looking away, trying to, have this fake neutrality as a scientist will work against you in your favor, because you would be just a regime, sympathizer in that sense. So don't do that. Do the opposite. Look at the data, look at the evidence, look at reality, and speak truth to power. And the last thing, also self-explanatory, don't withdraw from the fight. Now is the time to get in, because the moment you cede terrain, the moment you leave the public conversation, the moment you try to, not, or the moment you don't push the institutions, the moment you're not present anymore, you will lose the people, you will lose the trust of the people, you will lose your access and to shape the world for better. So don't do that. You're a democratic citizen. You have every right to go in and advocate for your interests and for the common good. And the last thing here is like your engagement, should be, it doesn't matter how, almost. You can engage in whatever way you think works for you. You have to be authentic and you have to meet the people where they are, that's all there is. And then as a member of democratic society, there's a few other things you can do, which is, of course, try to work either on the tech policy side to change this platform incentives and policies. You can also, educate journalists or work on journalistic reform, that they get rid of this performative neutrality and false balance reporting. So this is something that every individual can do also when working with journalists on reporting and their science, whenever, you tend to work in this media landscape. And the last thing is the institutional reform. So this can be on scientific institutions, that you just demand that there are consequences if you have, contrarian charlatans that have academic credentials or that have medical license and they spread anti-vax disinformation. You should advocate and demand that they are stripped of the medical license, that they lose the institutional affiliation, because this is a way to make sure the integrity of the institution is intact, and kind of keeping all of these, bad actors inside the house is not going to help. It's not going to help trust. It's also watering down what the institutions stand for. And lastly, defend democracy and science as a public good. So this is, you as a democratic citizens, you have the right to participate in democratic discourse. You have to normalize that scientists are actually, good actors in civic participation, because we have certain domain knowledge, because we can shape, certain policy discussions, also on a structural and then on a technical level. We have to be in the game, and we have to normalize being in the game. And if you're just a normal citizen, this also means that we have to protect and safeguard the scientific independence of institutions, of scientists, by building walls and guardrails between, political appointees and career scientists and institutional leaders. So these are all things we can do, and this is kind of the takeaway. All right, so that's it. That's what I wanted to say. Science Counterpunch. It's not done. We're going to plan season 2 for later this year. After the summer, probably, we're going to start the first recordings of the next guests. So this will hopefully keep expanding, but we already have a good body of evidence for you guys to look into, to explore. If you're a journalist, if you're working in the anti-science space, if you want to get active, if you're looking for a solution as an individual scientist, this is the website for you. This is the play around garden for you to just have a look and see what's going on. And if you want them to listen to the original, if you want to go back to the podcast and listen to the original one here on the podcast, feel free. All the conversations are publicly available for free. All the scientists have been very generous with their time. So that's for you. All right, then good luck and goodbye.